Hello everyone and welcome to Quality Old Games. Today we are having another tier list, and this time we are kind of ranking the factions in Rome Total War in order how enjoyable it is to play against them or how horrible they are to face. And that practically means that basically the campaign map, perhaps the layout, how well the factions are advancing in the campaign, and also the battles, how diverse or interesting, how diverse the rosters are, how interesting it's to fight against those rosters, etc., etc. And other things affect the rating as well. And well, perhaps it should be stated that I enjoy playing Romans the most, so I'm certain that affects my perspective here, at least to some degree. So perhaps if your main faction is, say, Greek cities, perhaps you would rate things a bit differently, but I try to kind of take all factions into consideration, but I think it's fair to state that my favorite factions are the Roman ones. But without further ado, let's begin. So first we have Armenia. I mean, in campaign, Armenia often remains quite small faction. The Egyptians usually are kind of expanding to block its Armenia's expansion, and while the unit roster is quite interesting, usually, I mean, in the campaign you end up fighting Armenia perhaps twice, thrice in proper battles. So, I mean, quite okay, but they don't offer any kind of proper challenge despite the rather interesting and varied unit roster. Then we have Britain. I think overall facing barbarians is rather nice because the battles are decided quite fastly, and I kind of like to keep the pace up in the campaign. So I think facing Britain is enjoyable. Of course, what makes it differ from really fun is that getting into the British Isles can be a bit difficult at times if the coastal cities don't have enough population, so you could build a port, and also those light chariots or chariot archers can be annoying at times. So that's the reason it gets only enjoyable. Then we have Brutii. And as I said, I like to play Roman factions. I usually like to fight against Roman factions as well. But Brutii can be a bit different at times, because usually in the campaign they take the Greek territory, Macedonian territory, Thracian territory, etc., etc., all those rich areas. And that means that they will field a lot of armies, and often their armies are really good quality. So the challenge is really nice. But at some point, when you are facing the fifth full stack army, having Praetorian cohorts, legionary cohorts, ballistae, archer auxilia, whatnot as support, it kind of gets... Perhaps we could move a bit onward, especially if you're fighting pretty much on the same region, you kind of get bogged down there. Then it might become a bit tedious, and because of that I will give it only okay. So basically, in order to beat Brutii, you usually need to kind of cheese them, stab them in the back with fleets or armies carried by fleets, etc., etc. But if you're going for a frontal assault, you will end up being bogged up and always facing another big army. So that's the reason it gets only okay from me. Then we have Carthage. I mean, it's enjoyable to fight against it. In the early game, it's rather easy opponent, and if it manages to survive to the late game, the roster is quite varied, so you might end up facing elephants or something like that. And what's nice about Carthage as well is that it has some settlements, especially Carthage, that has potential to have stone walls or large stone walls, so there is a variation to the sieges already in the early game. So that's the reason for enjoyable. Then we have Dacia. I mean, yeah, I like facing barbarians, they are easy to crush, and I think Dacia makes no exception. The unit roster is a bit simple or one-sided, and the territory is not that big, so they are kind of easy to beat. And, well, I mean, yeah. At least I like winning the battles, so facing Dacians, because of that, is also rather nice. Then we have Egypt, and I think for it applies pretty much the same thing as for the Brutii. So the faction is quite prosperous, often it's usually quite big, and that means that it will be fielding many strong armies. And once again, if you are going to head-to-head assault, you will be bogged down. There is always another army approaching you. Of course, it's nice to face stronger opponents, so there will be more of a challenge. Then again, once those chariot archers can be a bit annoying, but overall I think the roster is rather nice, and usually it's relatively easy to stab the Egyptians in the back if you are using fleet and invading their starting territories. So, I mean, enjoyable, okay, let's put them into lower enjoyable tier, at least for now. Then we have Gauls, as well. I favor Romans, and of Romans especially the Julii. I mean, the campaign really starts when one starts to face Gauls as Julii, and they are relatively easy to take. You get some nice, enjoyable victories with inferior numbers and so on and so forth. So it's really enjoyable to rout those warbands and their early infantry and even their late game infantry. While they may propose some challenge, but still relatively easy to expand, kind of enjoyable first proper opponent in the campaign if you are playing as Julii or any other neighbor of Gauls, because, well, they are not that good in battle in my opinion. So really fun to face them. Then we have Germania. I think the Germanian battles against Germania are really enjoyable. The infantry roster especially is varied. They have decent enough cavalry, they have good missile units, so the army composition is nice, and of course if you play as Romans, their heavy infantry can be rather threatening. Why I don't give it really fun is that Germania's settlements are mostly really small, and the distance between those settlements can be relatively big, especially if they are expanding to east. So, I mean, your armies kind of spend so many turns marching from one place to another. That's a bit annoying, at least for me. But the battles are really fun, but perhaps the campaign map position is not quite optimal for fun in the campaign when facing Germanians. Then we have Greek cities. I mean, the starting position is nice. You face them with quite many factions, and of course it's really nice to conquer those factions. They have the Wonders, Colossus of Rhodes, Statue of Zeus, both really important. Or actually the Zeus is for Macedon, I think, at the beginning. Yeah, well, in any case. But what makes me give these only could we have something else is that basically Greek cities is equaled with hoplites and armored hoplites. And especially when facing armored hoplites for the third time in a row, it can get a bit annoying because they are really hard to take out. Of course, you need to figure out how to take them out. But I mean, the battle becomes so slow-paced because you need to maneuver your troops so that you can kind of break the enemy formation and then jump on the unit one at a time. So the battles take long, and if you blunder something, then, well, the battle goes south rather soon. So that's the reason I'm giving them only this could we have something else tier. Then we have Julii. I mean, facing Romans is rather nice, and often Julii, when they expand in the campaign, they get that area of, well, north of Italy, barbarian territories. And there the settlements are quite far apart, so that means that you are not quite so bogged down as with Brutii when you are facing Julii. And of course in the early game, facing Hastati, Principes, Equites, with some missile support can be really fun as well with Barbarian, so I think Julii are rather fun to play against in the campaign. And about the difficulty, I kind of use very hard difficulty here in relation to these. Then we have Macedonia. I mean, once again, we have lots of phalanxes, but I think it's rather enjoyable because Macedonian phalanxes, they are easier to cope with than those armored hoplites, and furthermore Macedon can have rather decent cavalry units fielded as well, so that adds some diversity to the battles and can make them a bit more challenging, especially if the AI manages to maneuver them decently enough. So I think facing Macedon is rather enjoyable. Then we have Numidia. I will give them... Could we have something else as well? And the basic main reasons are they have lots of missile units, lots of missile cavalry units, and the distances between the settlements are rather long. And, well, mainly because I'm a Roman player and I also like to play with infantry, chasing down those missile units can be really annoying, and even if you have cavalry chasing down after those missile cavalry units can be really annoying. I think Numidia is relatively easily beaten if you attack them, but I don't think it's really that enjoyable. Of course, those two coastal settlements are easy to take, but going inland it can become a bit painful. And those battles, when you need to face missile cavalry, things get nasty rather quickly. Then we have Parthia, and to be honest, in most of the cases, you don't fight much against Parthia. So there isn't much to say. The starting location is rather difficult, and they have quite a few neighbors that kind of keep them in check. So if you end up facing them, perhaps you face some Eastern infantry, some horse archers or something like that, but not many battles against Parthians, at least in my experience. And those starting settlements they are nothing special, so I mean, okay, but perhaps there could be quite a bit more potential for Parthia in the campaign as well. Then we have Pontus. What I like about Pontus is that their unit roster is quite varied, and they usually end up surviving for quite a long time in the campaign, so you might actually end up facing them. However, they usually are relatively small faction because of mostly Egypt, but I mean, when you have those several battles that you probably will have against Pontus, those battles are relatively interesting. So you can face missile cavalry, though not horse archers, and perhaps the number of missile cavalry is not quite as much as with Numidia. And then there are scythed chariots, phalanxes, etc., etc. So I mean, quite enjoyable opponent in my opinion. Of course, because it's usually a rather small faction, the fun lasts a short while, so enjoyable only, not really fun. Then we have rebels, and they are just the most horrible faction in the entire game to face. Not because they are particularly difficult. Capturing rebel settlements in the early game is really enjoyable, at least in my opinion. But what makes the rebels really, really annoying is the constant spawning of rebel armies and rebel navies. I mean, even if you spend half of your game time fighting against them, they still keep coming and coming and coming, and that's just annoying. And that's enough to offset all the fun that you have in the early battles against rebels. Well, what's kind of a saving grace for them is that you don't need to kind of beat the whole army. It's enough that you rout them and the rebel army will be destroyed. But, I mean, the constant spawning, that's just horrible. Clearly, well, just horrible tier. Then we have Scipii, once again a Roman faction, and I don't think you get as bogged down with Scipii as you do with Brutii, and taking their main settlement in the Italian mainland, Capua, often is kind of a unique challenge because they tend to have a lot of troops over there, so you need to kind of consider how to maneuver against 2 or 3 full stack armies, besides a city featuring probably large stone walls at the very least. So that can be rather fun, but otherwise you don't quite become bogged down because they have forces in Northern Africa and in different islands. And you can perhaps bypass quite a few of those armies, especially as most of the Northern African cities Scipia usually control are on the coast, so it offers quite a bit of flexibility how you face them. Of course, the Brutia settlements are on the coast in Greece quite often as well, but at least in my experience, usually the Brutii armies are quite concentrated in such a way that you end up facing them in any case. Then we have Scythia. They are horrible as well. Not nearly as horrible as rebels, but still horrible. And the main reason is horse archers. Horse archers are really, really good units, but they are nasty to fight against. And Scythia spams horse archers in the campaign, at least in my experience. So the way to beat them is to utilize defensive battles in cities, but in the open field it can be just painful to fight against them. And to make matters worse, the distance between their settlements is the longest one in the campaign. So if you go against Scythians, be prepared to spend, say, tens of turns over there because of the large distance of those settlements. And those armies are away from something else you could do. So I think just horrible, at least for me. Then we have Seleucid Empire. I mean, I have a bit of mixed feelings about this. So in the early game, they are rather easy to take on. They are widely spread out, they don't have proper troops, and they have many opponents around them. So easy pickings, that's nice. In the late game, if they manage to survive, they have very varied roster, and it makes those battles really nice if they bring phalanxes, silver sheet legionaries, cavalry support, elephant support, some missile units to support. So that's really nice to face them in those scenarios. At the same time, they quite rarely make it to the late game. So I'm kind of considering, are they enjoyable because they get wiped out rather often, or are they really fun to face? But perhaps it might be kind of more consistent if I put them only to enjoyable tier. Then we have Spain. I mean, yeah, barbarian faction, they are easy to overcome, but often when you face Spain, you have already faced some other barbarians, and at some pace, even beating barbarians can become a bit repetitive and boring. And to make matters worse for Spain is that their roster is really simple. So some infantry units, a couple of cavalry units, and some missile units, and for some reason the AI likes to spam those missile units even if they are horrible. So, I mean, yeah, it's nice to beat them, but I mean, it becomes a bit repetitive. If the Spanish armies were a bit stronger, if their composition was a bit better, I think they would go to okay or even to enjoyable tier. But as it is, especially if you are coming from the kind of other side of the campaign map, or even from the center of the campaign map, facing Spain can be a bit boring, in my opinion. Then we have the Roman Senate, and I think it's really fun to face them. They have those 1 or 2 full stack armies, and of course Rome itself is rather well defended. So facing the Senate is always some kind of a challenge. How do you try to lure the defending armies out so you can go to the settlement straight or towards Rome straight away? Or how do you plan to face all those defending armies so you can take Rome even if there are those 2 full armies defending it? And I think that's always a nice nut to crack. And of course, if those battles go south, then you might end up having a rough fight against other Roman factions as well, if you fail to take Rome. So, I mean, there are high bets when you are facing them, and the battles, in my opinion, are really enjoyable as well. Then we have Thrace. I mean, once again, relatively easy faction to face. I mean, okay, it's usually a small faction, once again, and their roster is not that great. So, I mean, something to gobble up during the campaign. It's not usually kind of main opponents in the campaign. It usually does not cause serious harm in the early campaign. They just are there and try to do something, and then they get destroyed. That's pretty much the story of Thracia, at least in my campaigns, quite often. But yeah, that's my view. Do you agree or disagree? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you very much for watching. If you like the content, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member, and very special thanks to existing channel members Napoleon Complex, Kosakusar, Mark Anthony, Bluey Eye Wolf. Your support is greatly treasured. Have a great rest of the day. Quality Old Games out.